almost daily is from the New York Times, and they did an episode about Miriam Rodríguez very recently. So I found this story to be inspiring as well as very tragic. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. Sorry for the awkward introduction, but you guys should know by now that my intros aren't great. I do have a cough drop in. It's been kind of dry. My throat's been a little bit dry because the heater's been on and whatever. So, the New York Times article that I got most of my information from is called "She Stalked Her Daughter's Killers Across Mexico, One by One." And the article was written by Assam Ahmed. I believe they're going to be doing, if they haven't already done, something on Netflix about this story. Either a docuseries or a miniseries or a documentary. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe even just like a straight up show. So in 2014, we're in the city of San Fernando in Mexico. A lot of the names are Spanish in this story, and I don't speak Spanish. But this city is located in Tamaulipas, Mexico, which I believe is a state in Mexico. In 2014, San Fernando was a dark, dangerous place to live. Many bars and restaurants closed for fear of shootouts in public spaces, and mass graves were common. The Zetas, who were once part of a cartel called the Gulf Cartel, were at war with each other for years, and in order to fund their weapons and men, they kidnapped innocent citizens for ransom. Many times, those that they kidnapped were killed, since it was cheaper to kill a hostage than to keep them alive. The Rodríguez family did the best they could to survive and make a living in their city. Their son Luis moved away eventually to evade the violence, but Karen had stayed to work in her mother's store, a store called Rodeo Boots, which was a small cowboy apparel shop. On January 23rd, 2014, Karen Rodríguez went missing. She was trying to merge into traffic when two trucks pulled up on either side of her, stopping her vehicle. I believe she was driving a pickup truck. At the time, walkie-talkie. It's like a two-way radio or whatever. I don't know exactly what they're called, but she heard through the chatter someone call the man by the name Sama, S-A-M-A, and that stuck with her, and it started her on years-long investigation. So Miriam kept calling the man to ask if he had made any progress in finding her daughter. You might be wondering, why didn't she go to the police? She did go to the police, but the police aren't really any help in these kinds of cases. But Miriam decided to try to bring all of the evidence that she could find to the police to help them and encourage them in their investigation. So Sama stopped answering the phone. Other people, other criminals in the area started calling her, claiming to be the kidnappers, trying to get more money out of her. She ended up paying only $500 more, but never found Karen. Miriam, who was separated from her husband at the time, moved in with her oldest daughter, Azalea. It was at her daughter's house that she came to the realization that Karen was most likely dead. She seemed to accept it as a fact at this point. She told her daughter that she would not stop until she found the people who had taken Karen. Azalea said that her mother was a different person after that realization. Again, remember that she now knows the name Sama. And thanks to the mechanic who was kidnapped along with Karen, she knew that she could get somewhere with that information. They never intended to keep the mechanic, so they ended up freeing him pretty quickly. And he tried to tell Miriam as much as he could about where he was, who he saw, and what he heard. So Miriam started scouring Facebook for photos of Sama and any of his associates. She finally found a photo where he was tagged. In the photo was a woman who was wearing a uniform from an ice cream shop in a city about 2 hours away called Ciudad Victoria. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but Miriam ended up sitting outside of the store for weeks until she knew the woman's schedule. Eventually, Sama showed up and she was in custody, he gave up the names and locations of multiple associates. One of the men was barely 18 years old, and when they brought him in, he ended up giving up everything. While he was in questioning, Miriam actually gave him some food because he said that he was hungry. She gave him some chicken that she had in her purse that she was going to eat for lunch. She could tell that he was scared, and he was so young. She's reported as saying that he was a child and she was still a mother, even though he did have something to do with Miriam's disappearance. So he agreed to take them to the ranch where they killed their captives and buried them. He took them to an abandoned ranch at the end of a dirt road. There were bullet holes and debris and bloodstains, bones. There was a noose hanging from a tree. She ended up finding Karen's scarf and a seat cushion from Karen's truck in a pile of debris. At first, forensic agents claimed that Karen was not among the dozens of bodies that they had identified at the ranch. But Miriam fought the government on its analysis, and they ended up finding a piece of Karen's femur the following year. While they were driving away, Miriam recognized a barbecue restaurant very close to the ranch. She and her daughter Azalea had eaten there only days after Karen's kidnapping. A woman that she knew well, named Alvia Yulisa Betancourt, was eating there as well on that same day. Miriam had known this woman for her whole life, and Miriam asked her if she had heard about Karen's disappearance, and she said that she had not, which was strange because everyone had heard about it at this point. As they were driving away from the ranch, Miriam realized that Elvia most likely did know something about Karen's disappearance, and she actually did some digging around after that and found that she had actually been romantically involved with one of Karen's kidnappers, who was in prison for an unrelated crime. Miriam, in Miriam fashion, ended up waiting outside of the prison for days until Alpia showed up to visit her lover. The police came and arrested her at Miriam's behest, later discovering that some of the ransom calls had actually come from Alpia's house. Miriam continued to search for others who were involved in her kidnapping. She found that some were dead, some were in jail, others were now taxi drivers or gas delivery men. She did find a man named Enrique Flores. She found that his hometown was Aldama, and she ended up visiting his grandmother, who told her that now he was a born-again Christian who started going to church on the regular. Miriam started going to the same church, of course, and she found him there, and she had him arrested in church in front of all the parishioners. She had also tracked down a man who sold roses on the border, who had something to do with Karen's disappearance. She headed to find him with a gun in her purse, wearing houses, but he was selling sunglasses at this point. He recognized her and started to run. She was able to catch up with him, knocked him to the ground, and held her handgun to his back. She held him there for an hour and while she waited for the police to arrive. Miriam's crusade helped her to escape the pain of Karen's death, or to try to escape it. But all of the attention caught up with her. She was quoted as saying, "I don't care if they kill me. I died the day that they killed my daughter. I want to end this. I'm going to take out the people who hurt my daughter, and they can do whatever they want to me." In all, in 3 years, she was able to take down 10 people who were involved in Karen's kidnapping and death. In March 2017, more than 20 prisoners escaped the prison in Ciudad Victoria, where many of the criminals Miriam had put in jail were held. She was worried about this, and she asked for protection from police. They sent periodic patrols by her home and work. Despite this, she continued her pursuit. She ended up breaking her foot, chasing down one of the people on her list, a woman who was working as a nanny in Ciudad Victoria. She had spent days parked in front of the family home, waiting for the woman to show up. Finally, when the police showed up to arrest the woman, Miriam went sprinting towards them and fell and broke her foot. So, on Mother's Day of 2017, she headed home. She was living with her husband again, and a white Nissan truck pulled up behind her quietly and fired 13 rounds at Miriam. She was unable to run. Her foot was broken, and like I said, she was almost 60, and there were many men with obviously automatic guns. She died that day. Her legacy lives on, but the groups that she mobilized fighting against the cartels deflated a bit after her death. A month after her death, however, with tips from Miriam, another person was arrested for beating Karen while she was